So we are starting this deep dive in 1942, Yorkville, New York.
Right, the classic Yorkville case.
Yeah, and it starts with a dead dishwasher, which honestly sounds like the opening of some hard-boiled noir detective novel.
It really does. I mean, the initial reports suggest respiratory failure.
Right, maybe some kind of bizarre fever.
Yeah, but the actual culprit isn't a conventional pathogen at all. It's not a virus. It's this parasite called Trichinella spiralis.
And tracing the journey of that microscopic worm from a seemingly totally harmless meal all the way to a fatal autopsy, it's incredible.
It's a total masterclass.
Right. It's this obsessive, granular investigation that basically changes the entire world's approach to public health.
Because the biological mechanism of Trichinella is, well, it's fascinating.
Wow.
And completely gruesome.
Oh, it's so gross. Tell them how it works.
So you ingest these encysted larvae, right? They're usually hidden inside the muscle tissue of undercooked meat, often pork.
You have no idea.
No idea at all. And once they hit your stomach acid, the cysts dissolve, so the larvae are liberated.
Liberated into your stomach.
Exactly. They mature in your intestines, and then they start producing this whole new generation that physically burrows through your intestinal wall.
Ugh, burrowing. That word gets me every time.
I know, it's awful. But they migrate through your bloodstream, and then they encyst themselves in your own skeletal muscles.
Which is what kills you.
Right, because that migration process causes this intense, sometimes fatal inflammation, especially if they get into the diaphragm or the heart muscles.
So we have this field epidemiologist for the New York City Health Department, a guy named Lawrence Levy. And he gets handed this single, localized fatality.
Just one case.
Right, just one.
Yeah.
And what's wild is he doesn't just, log the death certificate into a filing cabinet and call it a day.
Which is what most people would do.
Exactly. He actually goes out into the city. He starts mapping the victim's final days.
Tracking his movements.
Yeah, his movements, his social interactions, and most importantly, his meals.
Because it's a foodborne parasite.
Right. And he traces this dishwasher's steps back to a German pork feast.
Which, epidemiologically speaking, presents a massive statistical anomaly.
How so?
Well, a feast implies communal dining, right?
Right. Lots of people eating the same thing.
Exactly. If you have tainted pork served to a huge crowd, the standard expectation is a cluster of cases. You should be seeing a localized explosion of gastrointestinal distress across that whole social group.
But Levy is looking at, 24 guests and kitchen workers?
Yeah, around there. And not a single one of them is sick.
Nobody is dying like the dishwasher?
Nobody. So Levy has to completely abandon the broad demographic data. He has to start building this microscopic matrix of exposure.
Like a literal spreadsheet of who ate what.
Basically, yeah. He interviews everyone, reconstructing the exact menu, attempting to cross-reference every single item consumed by every single person.
Looking for that one unique data point.
Looking for the outlier. He is essentially mapping chaotic human behavior, which is incredibly hard.
Because people lie. Or they just forget.
All the time. They don't remember exactly what they ate, or they misreport it, and this is crucial for kitchen staff, they grabbed a bite of something while walking past a counter.
Right, the grazing habit.
Yeah. So Levy had to understand the specific culinary habits of the victim versus the party guests. He was building this localized chain of transmission entirely out of human memory.
And through sheer relentless persistence, this matrix reveals the hidden variable.
The smoking gun.
Yeah. There was a small batch of raw, homemade sausage at this feast.
Raw sauce.
Raw-fy. And the victim, this dishwasher working back in the kitchen, was the only person who had eaten that specific sausage uncooked.
Because everyone else at the party ate the cooked pork.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the cooking process reached a temperature high enough to kill the Trichinella cysts.
It is just a stunning piece of deductive logic. I mean, Levy solved this not by isolating a virus in some multi-million-dollar laboratory, but by walking the pavement.
Literally hitting the streets.
Yes. Understanding local customs, understanding kitchen dynamics, and refusing to just accept the surface-level data.
He had to physically go to the environment.
Right. And this relentless ground-level pursuit of the primary source is the absolute essence of what would later become known as the field method.
Which is what this entire deep dive is about today.
Yeah.
And this story, the Yorkville dishwasher, it actually became legendary in public health circles.
Oh, absolutely.
The journalist Berton Roueché chronicled it. He called the piece "A Pig from Jersey," which is a great title.
It really is.
And it was later collected in his famous 1953 book, 11 Blue Men.
Which is such a critical piece of the source material we're looking at today.
Yeah, because this specific book forms this vital, incredibly human thread in the historical dossier we were unpacking.
The dossier compiled by Nick McKenzie.
Right. It draws from Series 1, Episode 4 of Rise and Fall of the U.S. Public Health Service. And the personal connection McKenzie brings to this institutional history is it's really profound.
It grounds the whole thing because McKenzie grew up in the Panama Canal Zone.
Right.
And his father was Dr. Ronald B. McKenzie, who was a U.S. Public Health Service officer.
A literal virus hunter.
Yeah, a hardcore boots-on-the-ground virus hunter. A man who spent his life immersed in the reality of tropical diseases and outbreak investigations.
And McKenzie describes this quiet, almost, sacred hand-me-down moment.
Where his dad gives him the book.
Yes. His father gives him a copy of 11 Blue Men. And it's this generational transmission of curiosity.
I love that phrase.
It's true, though. You have a father in the field handing his son a book that romanticizes the very dangerous, very real work he does every single day.
And that book essentially taught a whole generation of Americans what disease detection actually looked like.
Which is why we are framing our entire analysis today around that legacy, because we are looking at how an intense, almost paralyzing Cold War fear.
The fear of biological warfare.
Exactly, how that fear inadvertently birthed the Epidemic Intelligence Service.
EIS.
The world's most famous corps of outbreak investigators. The people widely known as the disease detectives.
The contrast between the localized detective work of Lawrence Levy in 1942 and the massive global machinery we rely on today is just staggering.
Oh, it's night and day structurally.
But the philosophy remains completely identical.
Right.
And for you listening, living in this modern ecosystem that is just choked with secondary information.
Dashboards and aggregated metrics everywhere.
Exactly. Passive data. This history is a masterclass. It demonstrates the raw power of stepping away from the desk, ignoring the noise of secondary reports, and demanding to see the primary evidence yourself.
So to get from one guy solving a sausage puzzle in New York to the creation of a formalized national intelligence service, we have to look at the geopolitical temperature.
The temperature of 1951.
Yes. We are in the anxious, deeply paranoid first months of the Korean War.
The Cold War is rapidly escalating.
And the United States government is staring down the terrifying, highly plausible prospect of biological weapons.
The threat profile had just fundamentally shifted at this point.
Right. It wasn't just tanks and planes anymore.
Washington wasn't just planning for conventional artillery or even the newly developed atomic bomb. They were analyzing the possibility that the Soviets or the Chinese might seed an American city with aerosolized pathogens.
Like spraying germs over a population.
Exactly. We are talking about weaponized anthrax, pneumonic plague, or tularemia.
Let's actually look at the biology of that terror for a second, because anthrax isn't like a bomb going off.
No, at all.
If an enemy releases anthrax spores into, say, a subway system in New York, there's no explosion. There's no flash of light.
The spores are inhaled, they settle deep into the lungs, and the initial presentation is completely unremarkable.
That's the scariest part.
It really is, because it mimics a generic, mild, upper respiratory infection.
No, a cold.
Yeah, a slight fever, maybe a dry cough, but within a matter of days, the bacteria rapidly multiply.
And then it gets bad.
Very bad. They release toxins that cause hemorrhagic mediastinitis.
Which means what exactly for the body?
It means massive bleeding and fluid buildup in the chest cavity. The incubation to crisis window is incredibly brief.
So you go from thinking you have the flu to drowning in your own fluids.
Literally.
Yeah.
And the mortality rate for inhalation anthrax without immediate intervention is extraordinarily high. By the time emergency rooms realize they aren't dealing with a bad flu season, the patient is often beyond saving.
And this is exactly the nightmare scenario that Alexander Langmuir brings to Washington.
Langmuir is such a crucial figure here, brilliant epidemiologist.
He steps into this atmosphere of utter dread at the Pentagon, and he makes a pitch that chills the defense establishment to the bone.
He really knew his audience.
He did. He basically tells them that if an enemy seeded an American city with a pathogen tomorrow, the United States wouldn't even know it was an attack until thousands of people were already dead.
He identified a catastrophic vulnerability in the nation's diagnostic landscape.
Because the system was so slow.
Right. Think about the mechanics of a natural outbreak. A few people get sick in different parts of a city, they go to their respective doctors.
And those doctors don't talk to each other right away.
Exactly. The doctors just note generic symptoms in their private files. To distinguish a deliberate biological attack from a naturally occurring outbreak requires an incredibly sophisticated, rapid synthesis of data across multiple jurisdictions.
Which didn't exist.
It did not. You would need to establish an epidemic curve, identify the index cases, and map the geographical dispersion of the symptoms in real time.
You're trying to figure out if these 50 cases of respiratory failure are a mutant strain of influenza, or if they map perfectly to the ventilation shafts of a specific transit hub.
Precisely. And Langmuir pointed out that the United States had almost no trained epidemiologists capable of making that real-time distinction.
The public health infrastructure was simply not equipped to act as an early warning radar.
Without a dedicated, highly trained core of experts constantly monitoring baseline health data and ready to deploy instantly, the country was flying completely blind.
He essentially walked into the Pentagon and said, "We are sitting ducks, and our diagnostic tools are so slow we won't even know we've been shot until the war is over."
It is a masterclass in bureaucratic leverage.
Right. He used the very real, very visceral fear of a Soviet bioweapon to secure funding for a peacetime public health corps.
And the strategy worked flawlessly.
They gave him the money.
They did. The fear of an invisible enemy directly catalyzed the creation of the Epidemic Intelligence Service, the EIS, on October 26, 1951.
And Langmuir designed it not as a static laboratory unit, right? It wasn't just guys in white coats at desks.
No, he designed it as a standing army of outbreak investigators. It was structured as a 2-year applied epidemiology apprenticeship.
Pulling in multidisciplinary talent.
Yeah, young doctors, scientists, statisticians, veterinarians.
And they housed this new intelligence service within the Communicable Disease Center, the CDC, in Atlanta.
Which is a wild historical footnote.
It really is, because the CDC was practically an infant agency at that point.
Barely existed.
It had only been created 5 years prior, in 1946. And its original mandate was essentially a wartime malaria control program.
Right. It was an offspring of the much older, much more traditional U.S. Public Health Service. The early CDC was basically known for men in trucks spraying DDT to kill mosquitoes in the American South.
So housing an elite intelligence service, tasked with national biodefense within this modest regional agency, was a fascinating structural choice by Langmuir.
It gave the EIS a degree of operational freedom. They were away from the massive bureaucracy of Washington.
And the mandate was that these officers had to be perpetually on call, pack a bag, ready to fly at a moment's notice.
Always ready.
But the historical dossier we are looking at raises a really profound debate about Langmuir's true intentions.
The intention behind the funding pitch.
Yeah, because, as history tells us, the massive biological attack on an American city never actually materialized.
Thank goodness.
Right. So did Langmuir genuinely believe a Soviet anthrax attack was imminent? Or was he a visionary who recognized that Cold War paranoia was literally the only key heavy enough to unlock the federal treasury?
Historians have dissected Langmuir's internal memos and public speeches for decades over this exact question.
And where do they land?
The consensus leans toward a brilliant synthesis of both.
Okay.
The threat of biowarfare was mathematically and scientifically plausible. Langmuir wasn't lying about the vulnerability. We really were flying blind.
He wasn't inventing a ghost.
No, but he was also deeply, deeply passionate about the necessity of a permanent professional disease surveillance system to combat natural pathogens.
So he used one to fund the other. It's like building a massive, multi-billion-dollar planetary defense shield because you're terrified of an alien invasion.
I love this analogy.
Right. You secure the funding, you build the radar, you staff the control rooms, the aliens never show up.
But you have the shield.
But you suddenly realize your incredibly sensitive orbital shield is perfectly calibrated to detect and deflect devastating hurricanes. We built a national defense war machine that accidentally became a global public healing machine.
The planetary shield analogy is perfect because it highlights the dual-use nature of the methodology.
Dual use.
Yeah. Langmuir married a geopolitical anxiety to a public health imperative by framing the EIS as an intelligence service. And notice the deliberate use of military terminology there.
Oh, for sure. Intelligence officers deployment.
Exactly. By doing that, he secured resources that traditional public health initiatives could never dream of. He built a system designed to catch a Soviet saboteur, knowing full well it would spend most of its time catching localized outbreaks of measles, hepatitis, and foodborne illness.
Because since the anticipated weaponized plague didn't drop from the sky in 1952, these newly minted Epidemic Intelligence Service officers couldn't just sit around their offices in Atlanta playing cards.
Right, waiting for a red phone to ring.
They had to calibrate their instruments. They had to practice. So they started deploying to investigate every natural outbreak they could find.
And this operational pivot introduces the core philosophy that would define the EIS forever.
Shoe leather epidemiology.
Shoe leather epidemiology. The term was Langmuir's deliberate rejection of the status quo.
Because prior to the EIS, federal public health work heavily relied on what we might call desk epidemiology.
Yes. The traditional method involved sitting in an office waiting for local health departments or general practitioners to mail in secondary reports of disease tallies.
Just waiting for the mail to arrive.
You aggregate the numbers, you draw a graph, and you look for trends.
Like a completely passive system.
Entirely passive.
You are waiting for data that has already been filtered, summarized, and potentially biased by the local doctor who filled out the form. You are looking at the shadow of the outbreak, not the outbreak itself.
And passive data is incredibly dangerous when you're dealing with novel or rapidly spreading pathogens.
Give me an example of how that fails.
Well, desk epidemiology might tell you that 50 people in a county have a fever, right? But it won't tell you the subtle, qualitative details of their environment.
It don't tell you they all ate the same raw sausage.
Exactly. It won't tell you the cultural practices of the affected community or the specific timeline of their symptoms or the anomalies that a local doctor might have dismissed as irrelevant because they were busy.
It's exactly why Lawrence Levy couldn't solve the trichinosis case from a desk. The initial report just said, dishwasher dead of respiratory failure.
You only find the raw sausage by walking the ground.
You have to physically go there.
You have to interview the patients, inspect the kitchens, and ask sharper, highly specific questions that the initial reporting forms don't even have boxes for.
And Langmuir instilled a militant insistence on this primary data collection.
Militant is the right word. He demanded that his officers go to the physical location of the outbreak.
They couldn't phone it in.
Never. They had to establish the clinical picture themselves. Is the reported fever accompanied by a specific type of rash? Are there asymptomatic carriers in the household?
They had to calculate the attack rate.
Right, the exact attack rate, meaning the proportion of exposed people who actually develop the disease. You cannot calculate a precise attack rate without interviewing both the sick and the healthy people in a given exposure setting.
Just like Levy interviewing the people who didn't get sick at the party.
Precisely.
The physical and psychological demands of this work in the 1950s must have been immense. These are highly educated professionals, often holding medical degrees or PhDs in statistics.
And their reality is not the sterile, controlled environment of a laboratory.
Imagine the logistics. It's, say, 1953. An EIS officer gets a phone call at 2:00 a.m. about a cluster of unexplained infantile paralysis in a rural Midwestern town.
They pack a bag, they get on a loud, vibrating prop plane.
They rent a car, and they drive into a community that is entirely consumed by panic.
They are stepping into active trauma zones. Parents are terrified, the local economy might be shutting down out of fear, and the rumor mill is operating at maximum capacity.
And they often faced intense hostility from local medical establishments, right?
Oh, absolutely. A rural general practitioner in the 1950s did not necessarily welcome a young, hotshot federal scientist from Atlanta showing up and demanding to review their patient files.
Who are you to tell me how to treat my patients?
Exactly. So the EIS officers had to be extraordinary diplomats. They had to build trust instantly while simultaneously constructing a rigorous timeline of the outbreak from absolute scratch.
They were cross-referencing hundreds of interviews, mapping geographical coordinates of residences, looking for the hidden denominator that connected the cases.
You take brilliant scientists, people who have spent a decade looking through microscopes or running complex statistical models, and you tell them their most valuable investigative tool is a pair of comfortable walking shoes.
That's a massive ego check.
It's huge. The ego check required to accept that your advanced theories are useless without the messy, exhausting groundwork of knocking on doors, that is a profound institutional culture shift.
And Langmuir was notoriously uncompromising on this front.
Very much so. If an EIS officer attempted to diagnose an outbreak or offer a containment strategy from a hotel room by merely making phone calls, they faced severe reprimand.
You had to get your shoes dirty.
The foundational ethos was empirical. The truth exists in the field, not in your hypotheses, and you must physically extract it from the environment.
Okay, so alongside this intense reactive fieldwork, Langmuir built the other half of the machinery. Continuous disease surveillance.
Right, the early warning radar.
Exactly. If shoe leather epidemiology is the missile interceptor, continuous surveillance is the radar spinning 204/7.
Because the concept of surveillance existed in fragmented forms, but Langmuir institutionalized it on a national systematic scale.
He recognized that to identify an anomaly, to spot the very first whispers of a biological attack or a novel virus, you first have to define what normal looks like.
You have to establish the baseline.
Right. If a hospital in Kansas reports 6 cases of measles in October, is that the start of an epidemic, or is that exactly how many cases Kansas always has in October?
Exactly the logic. Langmuir established robust networks demanding continuous reporting of specific communicable diseases from across the country.
And by aggregating this data weekly, the CDC could calculate the expected incidence rates for every region, adjusting for seasonal variations.
And once you have that statistical baseline, any deviation becomes glaringly obvious. A sudden spike in atypical pneumonia in a specific zip code immediately triggers an alarm.
This systematic collection and weekly publication of data became the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report,
The MMWR.
which is still considered the primary pulse check of the nation's health today.
It is. By combining the continuous radar of the MMWR with the rapid response deployment of the EIS, Langmuir transformed public health from a reactive firefighting operation into a permanent, data-driven intelligence apparatus.
But they had the theory, the training, and the surveillance network in place. An intelligence apparatus is only theoretical until it faces a catastrophic failure in the real world.
You have to test the system.
And the ultimate stress test for the EIS didn't come from a Soviet bomber dropping anthrax. It came from the absolute center of the American medical establishment.
During the rollout of the most highly anticipated medical breakthrough of the century,
We have to talk about 1955.
the year of the Cutter incident.
Yes, this is the crucible that forged the modern identity of the disease detectives. To understand the gravity of this, you really have to understand the psychological grip that polio had on the United States in the 1950s.
The fear of polio was a visceral, suffocating presence every single summer.
Every summer.
It was an enterovirus that primarily affected children, attacking the nervous system and causing varying degrees of paralysis.
Parents kept their children away from public pools. Movie theaters were empty.
And images of children in iron lungs were a constant, terrifying reminder of the disease's random cruelty.
Against that backdrop of terror, Dr. Jonas Salk develops the inactivated polio vaccine.
A massive breakthrough.
Huge. The clinical trials are a success, and in April 1955, the vaccine is declared safe and effective. It is hailed as an absolute miracle.
The national rollout begins instantly. Millions of doses are shipped across the country.
It's a moment of unprecedented national relief. But the mechanism of the Salk vaccine is critical to understanding what happened next.
Right, because Salk created an inactivated virus vaccine.
Walk us through what that actually means.
So the polio virus was grown in massive quantities in a laboratory.
Live virus.
Live, highly virulent virus. And then it was treated with formaldehyde.
To kill it.
Well, technically inactivated, but yes. The formaldehyde chemically cross-links the viral proteins, essentially destroying the virus's ability to replicate and cause disease.
But it leaves its structural shape intact enough that the human immune system recognizes it and produces neutralizing antibodies.
Exactly. You are injecting the corpse of the virus to train the immune system.
Okay, so the vaccine goes out, millions of kids line up. But almost immediately after the national vaccination campaign begins, the relief just shatters.
Reports start trickling into state health departments of children developing paralytic polio.
And the horrifying detail is the presentation, right? Because these children weren't just getting random cases of polio.
No, they were developing paralysis starting in the exact arm where they had received the vaccine injection just days prior.
Oh, that is so grim.
It was the absolute manifestation of the worst-case scenario. The cure appeared to be causing the disease.
The biological implication was terrifying. If the paralysis started at the injection site, it strongly suggested the vaccine itself contained live, virulent poliovirus.
The level of panic at the highest levels of government must have been paralyzing in itself.
You have a brand new, federally endorsed vaccine being injected into millions of children, and it might be actively spreading the epidemic it was designed to stop.
And the Surgeon General, representing the parent public health service, is facing an apocalyptic crisis. They cannot afford to wait for months of slow laboratory testing to figure out what is going wrong.
Because every day they wait, more kids are injected.
They needed definitive answers in days, or the entire national vaccination program would collapse, leaving millions more vulnerable to natural polio.
So the Surgeon General activates Langmuir's Epidemic Intelligence Service.
This was the moment the machine was built for.
The disease detectives hit the field, and the methodology they use is a perfect mirror of Lawrence Levy's search for the raw sausage back in '42.
The continuous surveillance network lights up, aggregating every new reported case of polio nationwide.
And the EIS officers deploy to the affected communities.
Utilizing their shoe leather epidemiology.
They are operating under immense pressure, conducting rigorous interviews with devastated parents, meticulously pulling pediatric medical records.
They aren't just logging the fact that a child is sick, they are tracking down the specific manufacturing lot numbers printed on the vials of the vaccine administered to each paralyzed child.
Because there were multiple companies making the vaccine.
Right. They map the geographical coordinates of the cases. They cross-reference the timing of the injections against the incubation period of the virus.
They are building a massive statistical matrix.
And through this rigorous mathematical process of elimination, they cut straight through the national panic.
Within a matter of days.
The EIS isolates the hidden variable. They trace the vast majority of the vaccine-associated paralysis cases back to contaminated lots produced by a single manufacturer.
Cutter Laboratories in Berkeley, California.
Yes, and the investigation revealed a catastrophic failure in Cutter's manufacturing process.
What went wrong with the formaldehyde?
The delicate chemical balance required for the formaldehyde inactivation hadn't been achieved consistently. Cellular debris in the vats had actually protected some of the viral particles from the formaldehyde.
Oh.
So Cutter Laboratories had inadvertently packaged and shipped live, virulent poliovirus.
It's a profound tragedy that resulted in paralyzed children and fatalities. But from the perspective of public health infrastructure, the speed and clinical accuracy of the EIS response saved the larger vaccine rollout.
They essentially amputated the infected limb of the program.
Isolating Cutter Labs.
Right, which allowed the safe vaccines from other manufacturers to continue protecting millions of children.
The Cutter incident was the absolute vindication of Langmuir's vision. It proved beyond debate that a standing rapid response corps of epidemiologists was an essential national asset.
But it also raises a fascinating conceptual point about the nature of the investigation itself.
Right, because the EIS was fundamentally built, funded, and trained to spot a deliberate malicious biological attack by a foreign adversary.
A Soviet attack.
Yeah, yet their methods translated seamlessly to finding a microscopic manufacturing error in a domestic pharmaceutical lab. The investigative machinery didn't care if the threat was Soviet anthrax or American corporate negligence.
Because the biological and statistical laws governing an outbreak are agnostic to intent.
Agnostic to intent. That's a great way to put it.
Whether a pathogen is released intentionally by a saboteur or accidentally through a faulty formaldehyde process or naturally from a zoonotic spillover.
The epidemiological footprint it leaves in a human population follows the exact same mathematical principles.
Langmuir's brilliance was recognizing that the source of the outbreak doesn't change the method required to trace it.
You establish the epidemic curve, map the geography, interview the exposed, and identify the common denominator.
Truth-finding requires the exact same rigor regardless of who caused the crisis.
And the success of the Cutter investigation leads us directly into the central thesis of this historical dossier.
The question of power.
Right. It's an exploration of the specific type of power the Epidemic Intelligence Service actually wielded, because we often conflate having the correct data with having the authority to act on it.
But in the realm of government bureaucracy, knowledge and command are structurally divorced.
It is a vital distinction in public health. We are looking at the difference between investigative authority and command authority.
An EIS officer possesses unparalleled investigative power. They have the training and the mandate to enter a community, run the statistical models, and prove definitively that, say, the local water supply is causing a lethal cholera outbreak.
They can point right at the well and say, there it is.
Yes, but they fundamentally lack the authority to command a response.
That EIS officer standing in the town square holding the undeniable proof of contaminated water cannot legally order the water to be shut off.
They cannot mandate a quarantine. They cannot order a recall of tainted vaccines, as we saw in the Cutter case.
They can only advise.
Strictly an advisory body. Their power is limited to finding the truth, building an airtight scientific narrative and making urgent recommendations.
So they do the exhausting, dangerous shoe leather work. They face the panic of the community. They build a matrix. They isolate the pathogen.
And then they have to hand off that explosive data report to a politician or a state governor and simply hope the people in charge actually listen to the science.
Isn't that incredibly frustrating? Structurally, it's all influence, no enforcement.
It is the eternal frustration of the scientist operating within a political ecosystem. The command authority, the legal hammer to enforce action, resides with local and state health departments, with governors, with the Surgeon General at the federal level, or with elected officials.
The EIS officer's role is to speak objective truth to power.
And often, that truth is economically or politically inconvenient for the people holding the hammer.
We talked earlier about the parent-offspring dynamic between the older U.S. Public Health Service and the younger CDC. How does this advisory limitation play into that institutional hierarchy over the decades?
It creates one of the most fascinating institutional paradoxes in American government.
Sounds so.
Well, the parent organization, the Public Health Service, technically held the formal regulatory and command authority. But over the ensuing decades, as public health threats became more complex and globalized, the PHS's direct operational footprint began to shrink.
They were less visible in the field.
Meanwhile, the offspring agency, the CDC, and specifically the EIS disease detectives within it, became the highly visible, globally respected face of American public health.
Because they were the ones physically on the ground solving the terrifying mysteries.
Exactly. Real power in the modern era isn't always about legal enforcement. It's about controlling the narrative through undeniable expertise.
The CDC accrued massive influence because they held the monopoly on the data.
When an EIS officer stood at a podium and presented a mathematically flawless epidemic curve, it became politically impossible for the command authorities to ignore them.
And honestly, there's a hidden advantage to not having the hammer.
Oh, absolutely.
If an EIS officer had the unilateral power to instantly shut down a factory or blockade a state border or quarantine a city, their investigations would be viewed with intense suspicion.
They would be seen as an occupying federal force.
People wouldn't answer their doors. They wouldn't answer the survey questions.
By lacking enforcement power, they maintain their status as neutral arbiters of fact. Their authority stems entirely from the transparent rigor of their methodology.
They bring the diagnostic X-ray of the outbreak to the table, clearly illuminating the broken bone.
And they let the political structures decide how painful the cast needs to be. This perceived neutrality is essential for gaining the trust of terrified communities and hostile local governments during a crisis.
And the sheer effectiveness of this truth-finding methodology was so undeniable that it couldn't be contained within the borders of the United States.
The EIS naturally evolved from a domestic defense mechanism into a global standard.
It became one of America's most impactful exports.
Because the global health community observed the U.S. successfully navigating complex outbreaks using this model, and the demand for that capability became universal.
But you can't just ship a crate of shoe leather epidemiology overseas.
No, you can't. The CDC realized they had to export the training apparatus itself.
They began assisting other nations in establishing Field Epidemiology Training Programs, or FETPs.
This is the direct global descendant of Langmuir's vision.
And these are basically local versions of the EIS, right?
Exactly. FETPs are essentially customized in-country clones of the EIS. They are 2-year applied training programs that teach local doctors and scientists how to conduct rigorous field investigations and build continuous surveillance systems tailored to their specific environments and resources.
This is crucial because shoe leather epidemiology is uniquely adaptable. You don't need a billion-dollar laboratory to map a chain of transmission.
You need a sharp mind, persistence, and an understanding of human behavior.
We didn't just send our own detectives. We taught the rest of the world how to put on their own shoes and ask better questions.
And the impact of this global network over the last 70 years is just staggering. We are talking about the alumni of these programs being at the absolute vanguard of modern medical history.
Like the eradication of smallpox.
Arguably the single greatest triumph in the history of public health. And it relied heavily on the surveillance and containment strategies pioneered by EIS alumni.
They didn't just vaccinate everyone blindly. Right.
No, they used shoe leather techniques to hunt down every last active case of smallpox on Earth and build ring vaccination perimeters around them.
That is incredible.
They were also the ones who cracked the code on Legionnaire's disease after the mysterious outbreak at a Philadelphia hotel in 1976.
They mapped the epidemiology of toxic shock syndrome,
They were on the front lines defining the transmission vectors during the terrifying early days of the AIDS epidemic.
And they continue to be the tip of the spear responding to Ebola outbreaks in Africa.
Thousands of disease detectives have passed through these programs since 1951. They form this global, interconnected fraternity of experts who all speak the exact same methodological language.
So when a novel pathogen emerges anywhere on the globe today, there is an extraordinarily high probability that a scientist trained in the Langmuir tradition is one of the very first people on the ground.
Establishing the epidemic curve, demanding primary data, and looking for the hidden variables.
It is profound that America's most enduring public health export wasn't a specific pharmaceutical drug or a piece of proprietary technology.
It was a philosophy of curiosity.
We exported a mindset. We taught the world that no matter how chaotic or invisible an epidemic seems, it obeys biological rules, it leaves a trail, and if you are rigorous enough, you can find the truth.
That philosophy is the true legacy of the Epidemic Intelligence Service. It is the conviction that the scientific method applied relentlessly in the field can illuminate the darkest, most terrifying public health crises.
Which brings us back to the incredible journey of this historical dossier. We started in 1951 with the United States paralyzed by a very real, very justified Cold War dread.
The fear that an invisible Soviet enemy might unleash aerosolized anthrax on American soil.
And to defend against that nightmare, Alexander Langmuir leveraged the paranoia to build an intelligence service.
An institution born directly from the fear of war that evolved into a permanent, truth-seeking force for global health.
A force that cut its teeth not on foreign bioweapons, but on domestic tragedies like the 1955 Qatar polio vaccine incident.
They proved that the rigorous mathematical pursuit of data works identically, whether you are hunting a Soviet saboteur or a microscopic manufacturing error.
And we explore that fascinating structural paradox, that the incredible power of these disease detectives lies entirely in their method, in their unyielding search for the primary source, not in any legal mandate to command a response.
They have the power to illuminate the murkiness to find the truth, but they must rely on the rest of society to act on it.
The ethos of the disease detective, the refusal to accept the surface-level report, the insistence on verifying the data yourself, has profound relevance for every single person navigating the modern world.
Because we are constantly bombarded with secondary sources.
Think about how we consume information during a crisis today, whether it's a new health scare, a political scandal, or an economic shock. Our default instinct is to consume aggregated data, rumors, and armchair analysis from the comfort of our screens.
We rely on the passive intake of filtered information.
We are all practicing desk epidemiology.
We accept the data that is handed to us without questioning the methodology behind it. We look at the shadow instead of the object.
But the lesson of Lawrence Levy tracking down that raw sausage in 1942, the lesson of the EIS tracing the polio vaccine lots in 1955, is that the truth rarely lives in the secondary reports.
The shoe-leather approach, demanding primary evidence, asking the uncomfortable questions, seeking the hidden variables that don't fit the narrative, that is a mindset everyone can and should adopt.
You don't need a medical degree to be relentlessly, rigorously curious about the information you allow into your mind.
It's about insisting on clarity in a world that profits from murkiness. It's demanding to see the raw data, or at least demanding to know exactly how the data was gathered before you accept the diagnosis.
And as we close this deep dive, I want to leave you with a thought that really lingers from this entire history. We've seen how the most effective life-saving public health tool in modern history, this massive global network of disease detectives, was built entirely by accident.
It was funded, structured, and fueled by the terrifying fear of a biological war that, thankfully, never happened.
Langmuir built a hurricane shield because everyone was terrified of aliens. It makes you wonder, as we look at the immense anxieties driving our society today, what massive world-changing systems are we accidentally building right now, hidden inside our greatest fears?